In the event that you were laboring under the mistaken impression that the media was going to let this whole Robert Foster, Billy Graham rule thing go, allow me to disabuse you of that notion right now. They're not, and I think I can explain why. Hang around, we'll talk about that. So, I want to start by talking about this article from the Los Angeles Times. It's an editorial that appeared today, about 3 a.m. this morning. I want to first note, again, this is an editorial. Thank goodness that they were good enough to mark it as such for us. But I want to read through this real quick. It's real short, and then I'm going to provide some commentary on it. So here's the headline. Editorial. Following the Billy Graham rule doesn't make you noble. It makes you a sexist dinosaur. This is from the Times editorial board. Robert Foster wants to be governor of Mississippi, at least the male half of it. A Republican first-term state representative who's running for the state's top job, Foster doesn't seem to value women much beyond their bodies. Last week, a female reporter at Mississippi Today, a nonprofit digital news company, wrote that her request for a ride-along with the candidate had been denied, unless she brought a male colleague with her. Ride-alongs allow reporters to spend time with subjects going through their daily routine. It's an interview technique that can give readers a closer, more detailed picture of the subject. In this case, reporter Larison Campbell didn't even need to spend time with Foster to find out that he is a sexist dinosaur. Foster's explanation for the unusual condition he put on the interview was that he feared he might be accused of having an extramarital affair if he spent time alone with a woman who was not his wife. Once the story went national, Foster explained in a tweet that he obeyed the so-called Billy Graham rule, which is supposed to help men avoid being tempted by women or being suspected of it. That, I know I was going to wait till the end to do my commentary, but that is a flagrant misrepresentation of the Billy Graham rule, and the people at the Los Angeles Times editorial board should know that. It just goes to prove my point, though, that the writers at major national daily newspapers know squat about religion. Rant over. Let's go back. He said it was a matter of respect, notice the scare quotes they put there, for his wife. Ugh. If this sounds like it's something from a different era, that's because it is. Cooked up by the Reverend William Franklin Billy Graham Jr. in 1948, the rule holds that a man should never be in a room alone with a woman to whom he is not married. Incredibly, this relic has made a comeback in modern times as a reaction to the Me Too movement. Men in power say that they are limiting contact with women in the workplace to protect themselves from being accused of sexual misconduct. Vice President Mike Pence practices a form of the rule, refusing to dine alone with women. Forgive us from stating the obvious, but the best way not to be accused of sexual misconduct is not to engage in sexual misconduct. Avoiding women to keep your reputation clean is more punitive than noble. In fact, it's sexism, and a particularly pernicious form of it because it is masquerading as courtesy. Being excluded from private confabs with the boss and other opportunities in and out of the office that men use to bond and to advance poses as much potential harm to a woman's career as having a boss who makes lewd suggestions. Look, cultural upheavals are scary, but that's no excuse to practice discrimination and to devolve into a Saudi-like society in which women's bodies must be kept away from men so they don't lose control. If Foster, Pence, and the executives avoiding contact with women can't leave their sexual desire at the office door, they must find non-discriminatory ways to keep their reputations safe. May we suggest body cams or chastity belts in the office? If those sound ridiculous to men, they're no more absurd than the many injustices that have been perpetrated on women just for being women. Well, I think it's safe to say that you can all guess that I'm going to have something to say about that, so let's step away from the article for a second and I'll give you some commentary. So on the one hand, I'm a little bit surprised that this has stayed in the public eye as part of the news cycle for as long as it has. I really expected this to be a flash in the pan that was going to disappear within 24 hours, much like the situation with Mike Pence did a year or two ago, whenever that was. On the other hand, I'm kind of not surprised that it has stayed in the public eye for this long, and I think that there are a number of factors that would explain that. I certainly think that one of those factors would be the fact that this is an election year in the U.S. We're building up towards the presidential election. I think that another piece of that is kind of flows out of the election piece, in that I think that this situation sort of ticks all of the boxes for the coastal elites that already have certain preconceived notions about white men, about Southern men, about rural voters, about people that live in flyover country. It just kind of hits all of their buttons in some ways. And so for those reasons, I'm not surprised that it has stayed in the news. But I think that it does show a couple of other interesting features that explain its continued life. And I think that you have to view this through the lens of the Me Too movement. And I don't want to reduce this to being a backlash to Me Too, because the Billy Graham rule has been around much longer than Me Too has. However, I think that it has risen back to prominence again at this point because of the whole Me Too movement. But I think that the bigger issue that's kind of undergirding all of this, that I think points to the reason why the media can't let this go, is what is known as the male disposability hypothesis. And so for those of you who are unaware of it, the male disposability thesis would say that we have this tendency to be less concerned about the well-being of men than we are about the well-being of women. And thus society, whatever the situation may be, puts men dead last every single time. And you see, on a societal level, our expectation has always been that men are going to sacrifice themselves for the good of women. And so we can see that, for example, in situations, scenarios where there's physical danger, right? So if someone, takes a bunch of folks hostage during a bank robbery, who do they negotiate for when they send the negotiator out, right? Well, send out the women and children, right? If the Titanic is sinking in the North Atlantic, right? What's, the rule that everyone is supposed to obey? Well, it's women and children first. And so at every turn, the expectation is that men should sacrifice themselves for the benefit of women and children as well. The difference, though, here is that we're no longer just expecting men to sacrifice their lives for the benefit of women. Now we're expecting them to sacrifice their reputations too. And so I think that, well, let me read you a couple of quotes I think that really draw out this male disposability hypothesis. The first one is from Hillary Clinton. I want to say that this one is from around, I think, 1995, maybe 1996, 97, somewhere in there. So here's the quote. Hillary Clinton said, quote, "Women have always been the primary victims of war. Women lose their husbands, their fathers, their sons in combat," end quote. Now, I imagine that the reality that women are the primary victims of war would be a great surprise to all of the men who were dead because of war. I mean, after all, it's the men who died. It's the men who were shot. It's the men who were maimed. Something like, I think, 98 to 99% of all combat deaths throughout the history of the United States have been men. But hey, women are the real victims. This is another quote. This one is from Aloysia Inyumba, who is a Rwandan politician. This is regarding the Rwandan genocide. She said, quote, "The genocide in Rwanda is a far-reaching tragedy that has taken a particularly hard toll on women. They now comprise 70% of the population since the genocide chiefly exterminated the male population," end quote. Well, I guess being exterminated wasn't a particularly hard toll on the men. Right? But see, this is that societal expectation that we're seeing. We're hearing it coming up here, this idea that men should sacrifice themselves for women. And I don't think that you can see this clearly without stepping back and looking at the larger question of feminism as it exists in the Western world and the way that it kind of moved in three waves. So with first wave feminism, what you had was a movement that sought to give women men's rights without any of men's responsibilities. And then with second wave feminism, the movement then sought to reduce women's responsibilities or to outright eliminate them where possible. And then with third wave feminism, you have a movement that is seeking to increase men's responsibilities. You see, it's not just that society puts men dead last at every turn. It's that society expects men to put men dead last at every turn. And so this is the reason, I think, for the sort of editorial outcries that we're hearing against the Billy Graham rule that are aimed at Robert Foster. I mean, effectively what these editorial writers are saying is, how dare this man refuse to sacrifice himself when a woman wants him to do something that could damage him? How dare he refuse? You see, the expectation that we have is that men are just going to keep right on doing what they've always done, even when it is demonstrably against their interests for them to do so. And so if you wanted to put that another way, we could put it like this. It's that we still ask men to do all of the same things that we asked them to do a century ago. I would go so far as to argue that we actually ask them to do more than we asked them to do a century ago. But the difference is men are no longer allowed to expect even the slightest scintilla of thanks for what it is that they do. And so that's the reason that I think that we're seeing this outcry. It's that men have started to wake up to the fact that continuing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of women isn't such a good deal for them anymore because they don't get a word of thanks for it. Furthermore, I think that's what's happening here is that men have woken up to the reality that all that it takes is a whisper of an accusation, and your name and your reputation will be irreparably damaged for the rest of your life. And this should tell you something about the thought process that most men have. We'd rather be killed in war than have our reputations destroyed. Think about that for a bit. Thank you all so much for listening. Hope to see you next time. Thank you all so much for sticking around for the end of the video. If you're being helped by the content that I'm producing and putting on the channel here, please subscribe to the channel. That way you can get notified when there's new content that's available. If you appreciated this video, by all means like it so that I can know if what I'm doing is successful. And if you have questions, leave them in the comments below. Thank you all so much, and God bless.